The AGP was started in 2010. So this year, Farnborough would have been the 10th anniversary, and we were all looking forward to it. Unfortunately, due to circumstances, of course, that's not possible. So we're making do with this video instead. The aim of the AGP was to make the UK the most attractive aerospace location in the world. And it's something that we think we're doing extremely well on, but there's an awful long way to go. It is an association between business, academia, regional trade associations, unions, and the government. We've been quite successful to date in that we've managed to acquire 2.6 billion of gross funding for the Aerospace Technology Institute. We have launched improvement programs for the supply chain, such as SC21CNG, NATEP, Sharing in Growth. We've also managed to secure £300 million of gross funding for Future Flight, which is an ISCF Challenge Fund programme that is in the initial phases, and currently bids are being assessed. We've launched a Women in Aviation initiative to try and encourage a more diverse population in the engineering side. And we're on the cusp, we hope, of having a high-value design, or Project Brunel, proposal accepted by UKRI. So aerospace in the UK is currently number 2 in the world. We wish to retain that as number 2 in the world. The competition from the international community is very fierce, with many other countries wishing, and their governments wishing, to overtake us. Today, as part of the AGP programme for Farnborough Connect, you should be able to see the agenda. You see the exciting programme that we have for the rest of the day. In particular, we're looking to the future and a lower carbon future, and how we can help the UK be at the forefront of the green revolution that has to come in order to meet the 2050 requirement of the UK government for zero carbon. There's a number of sessions programmed for the rest of the day. They include also the opportunity that we have on the back of COVID-19, which is going to be a huge disruptor to the industry, and will cause all sorts of outcomes that none of us really understand. But one thing that is almost certain is it going to accelerate change and accelerate the ability and the demand for cleaner and better aircraft for the future. The UK needs to be right in the forefront of this, and working with the ATI, Future Flight Challenge, and other government bodies. We've got to make sure that industry and the government are aligned.
Well, welcome everyone to this morning's Aerospace Growth Partnership webinar on the future of the aerospace industry, restart, recovery and resilience. This panel is part of a programme of AGP activity during Farnborough Connect, so please do take a look at some of the other sessions we have on. I'm Katie Roscoe, I'm the chair of the AGP Engagement Working Group, and I'm hosting today's discussion. And normally right now we would all be together at Farnborough Air Show, but today we're getting together virtually, and the reason for that is COVID-19. And the impact of COVID-19 has been felt throughout the world and also the global aviation and aerospace industry. According to IATA, worldwide domestic flights have dropped by 70%. Europe's largest airports have managed 90% fewer flights. And we've now started to hear announcements on job losses for airlines, manufacturers, and throughout the supply chain. Today, the AGP has brought together a panel to set out government, industry and policy views on the key topics for our sector in the wake of this global pandemic, including how we can secure our critical supply chains, boost R&T and innovation, and work with government to build back better. So let me introduce you to our panel, after which I'll then invite each of them to make some introductory remarks. I'll then pose some questions and we'll have a discussion. And I'll ask the Minister to make some final remarks before we close. So joining us today, we have Nadhim Zahawi, MP, the Minister for Business and Industry, Tom Williams, Chair of the UK Aerospace Supply Chain Task Force and former Global Chief Operating Officer of Airbus, Giles Wilkes, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for Government and former Special Advisor on Industrial Strategy to Number 10, and Mandy Ridyard, Finance Director for Progimac. So first up, I'd like to ask the Minister to open up with his opening remarks. Minister.
Thank you very much. We've been, I think, pretty quick to put a wide range of support for business and workers in place when the coronavirus pandemic first hit. We are delivering, I think, one of the most generous and comprehensive packages of support globally, providing £330 billion of loans, guarantees to support firms through the crisis. It includes paying over 70 billion in loans and grants to companies large and small through schemes like the Coronavirus Business Interruption Scheme and, of course, the Small Business Grant Scheme. This month, the Chancellor has also set out a plan for jobs to really kickstart the nation's economic recovery ahead of a package of medium-term recovery measures in the upcoming budget and, of course, the spending review. We are announcing further steps to support business of all sizes across the country to bounce back from the coronavirus pandemic by helping companies keep and create jobs, support work-based training. Traineeships are going to be a big part of this, stimulating consumer demand, of course, boosting infrastructure and investing in a green transition, which you're going to hear a lot more about. We have been, I think, a long time supporter of the UK's aerospace industry. We have put substantial funding in place to take forward R&D and industrialization across the sector. And I think we have become, obviously, the home for the Airbus wing production and its Wing of Tomorrow program, the Rolls-Royce's development program for UltraFan, which will lead to a new family of the world's most efficient jet engines. And I think our support for the UK aviation and aerospace industries during the crisis, the COVID crisis, now includes a suite of measures totaling more than £8 billion in grants, loans, and guarantees to support exports. We will continue to support businesses as the wider economic recovery gets underway. UK Export Finance expects to provide over £5.5 billion of support for aerospace exports over the next 18 months. Whilst we know global demand for air travel has slumped, we also know that the export-led growth is key to the sector's recovery, with over 90% of aerospace products and services exported, and an estimated, I think, something like £32 billion in exports last year alone. Around 2.3 billion from the COVID Corporate Finance Facility, that's the Bank of England facility, has been committed to aerospace and aviation so far to support the sector's cash flow during the crisis. This is, I think, supported some of the liquidity of the larger firms that was so badly needed, bridging obviously the coronavirus disruption to cash flow, and I think helped keep the supply chain moving as well. The wider manufacturing sector has also obviously received support, 3.3 billion so far, through the furlough scheme, the job retention scheme, to protect millions of jobs and allow businesses to retain the talent that makes the UK sector world-class, in my view. With industry, we've committed another 400 million in aerospace R&D funding in the past year through the ATI, the Aerospace Technology Institute, enabling, I think, ambitious research to go ahead and helping companies of all sizes across the UK recover from the pandemic. And we continue to work with companies receiving grants to maintain momentum as they develop vital technology that will secure I think it will be hopefully a prosperous future for the sector. I think these measures, combined with the economy-wide support for small business and workers, means the UK aerospace sector has been able to protect thousands of staff and will be well positioned, in my view, for when the demand for air travel returns. However, and this is important, I also know that some firms have had to make the difficult decisions to let staff go. And of course, this is unfortunate, of course, and difficult. But please be assured that we will do all we can to support those workers back into employment. I'm also discussing with businesses about what more needs to be done. We're committed to working together with industry, academia, and of course the devolved administrations to achieve our shared goal to get the sector back on its feet and into growth as soon as possible.
Thank you very much, Minister. I'd like to now hand over to Tom Williams for his introductory remarks.
Thank you for that, and thank you, Minister. I think the purpose of the task force, just to say a few words on that, is certainly to try and address this crisis. And I could say, just as an introductory comment, I worked through many crises in my 20-odd years in Airbus, 9/11, SARS, Gulf War I, 2008 financial crisis. None of them are anything like the magnitude of this crisis and potentially the duration of it. So it's certainly more dramatic than anything I've experienced. And I think that's the issue for many in the supply chain today. It comes at a time when many of them were ramping up. Cash flows were being committed to investment in new equipment, facilities, training new people, raw materials. And of course, the other challenge for aerospace is that it is a very long cycle industry. And in fact, we had one of our task force meetings this morning, and we were talking about some of the raw material. If we go through things like forging, forged components, have up to 36 months from when the ore's been dug out the ground to the delivery of components into an aircraft. So it is a long cycle industry, and clearly that long cycle can affect it both on the downturn and hopefully when the upturn comes, and that's part of the challenge. So I think for us, we're trying to manage, we're focusing on the UK supply chain. We're making sure we can help companies through the crisis as much as possible, and of course to make sure we prepare them for the recovery. As the Minister has said, clearly a key part of that will be protecting skills and capability. The UK has a very skilled aerospace workforce. It's the number 2 in the world in terms of aerospace exports. And that's a hard-won position, which many other countries would like to copy. So there are many people who would like to catch some of that UK business. So in that situation, we've put together the steering group. The steering group has most of the key people in terms of primes and tier 1 suppliers. We're focused on civil aerospace, although we will watch carefully the implications on the military side, because there's quite a number of suppliers to civil aircraft who are also important suppliers on the military aspect as well. So we've got to watch that capability for the longer term as well. But certainly we have all of the key people at this point there: Airbus, Rolls-Royce, GKN, Spirit, Bombardier, Safran, for example. And of course we have that group is being led and all of it coordinated through ADS. And we also have representatives of the SMEs to try and get not just a tier 1 or a primes view, and we have representatives of BASE to make sure that we've got a view from government. Our first priorities, very quickly, have been to focus on, first of all, establishing a strict governance with binding NDAs, because we're dealing with quite often quite sensitive information. We've built a mapping of the key suppliers across the UK, and at the moment that's mapping a huge range of suppliers, but we're focusing on 187 suppliers at this point in time. And clearly we're then looking at probably about 20 to 30 of those that are being the ones that are most in priority and most needing help. So we're looking at what's the immediate support. We're looking at how are they being able to access things like CBILS, which was already mentioned by the Minister. There's a few issues, mainly because of some of those challenging cash flow situations, but also because of issues such as debt to equity ratios and covenants that will create some other issues, but we're trying to work through those. We're ensuring then that for those suppliers that are having problems, we have a coordinated approach from the tier ones and primes so that we don't have all of them jumping in and perhaps doing things that are contradictory. We're looking also at trying to recommend a clear set of actions to try and make sure those companies can be viable for the longer term. And in doing that, we're also engaging programs like SC21 and Sharing and Growth, which has been run the government schemes, but with strong support from ADS. It's clear that as we go through this, we're talking about an industry that could be, over the next 2 or 3 years, 30 to 40% smaller than what we've been accustomed to. And that probably means that we're going to have to reshape the supply chain to make sure that companies have not just got the liquidity, but have also got the solvency, that they've got a decent business to bring them out of the other side of this cycle. So we will, of course, be looking on a commodity by commodity basis at where are the key capabilities. We will be encouraging, where appropriate, mergers and combinations of suppliers to make sure that we've got the right group of suppliers to come out, first of all, to help them survive, but also to make sure we emerge from this with a still strong supply chain to retain the UK's key competitive position worldwide. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Giles, can I pass over to you next?
Yes, thank you very much, Katie. First, just a quick reflection here. It's a great pleasure to be here and also to observe that this has been a real success story for the UK. It's something we should always remember that, and I'm going to say this with the tiniest pat on the back, that when industrial strategy got going again, it was so great that we had the aerospace sector to start with, because you guys make the most phenomenally good case for government strategic support. And what's interesting about this is the case that you made back then, and I'm talking 2011, 2012 under the coalition, was all about huge demand certainty, the most wonderful long pipeline. As Tom just says there, the long cycle that you have in aerospace is an absolute dream to plan towards. The one thing we didn't think we ever needed to worry about was the demand side. And so what makes it extremely challenging right now is, whereas all the work back then between 2011 and 15 and was about, and actually continuing on with the aerospace sector deal under Theresa May and so forth, was all about making sure that we're up to winning the supply battle for this fantastic prize of single-aisle jets and the net zero transition. Now we seem to have, suddenly out of nowhere, the opposite problem, which is the demand disappears, but we have all these fantastic skills. So I'd like to reiterate what the Minister said there. We've had a really impressive economic reaction from the government to the immediate coronavirus crisis. It's very difficult to change an entire economic approach in a matter of a few weeks, and the shielding process has been quite extraordinary. The protecting liquidity, otherwise the loss of valuable jobs and skills and organisational capital, as the economists like to put it, could have been really horrendous. We have prevented that. But the really difficult part is working out what you're going to have to do through this restructuring process. So, I mean, where I feel optimistic is the record of the aerospace industry in working with the government over the last few years in developing structures like the Aerospace Technological Institute, which we started up in the wake of that failure of BAE and EADS to have a merger in 2012. If you remember that then provided the sort of cornerstone to keep telling people internationally, this place is still worth coming to and investing. And boy, have people invested, and we've seen a huge advantage from that. But also things like the talent retention scheme, which I remember Michael Fallon keeping going for the occasional loss of defence skills, the sharing and growth partnership, which is, I think, quite possibly the only example of a really successful management-focused supply chain program that we've run in the last 10 years. Again, aerospace taking the lead here. Your track record in being able to do these sorts of things is really excellent, but they take time. And I do hope there's going to be patience on all sides, because the speed with which the government was able to act broadly over the whole economy is in a funny way easier when you don't have to make discriminating judgments. I hope that both industry and all the people clamoring at the government are going to show a little patience now as these things are developed, because I know that it takes much, much longer to get the sorts of institutions that retain skills, retain R&D going. It takes months. And that's the problem with industrial strategy. Normally it's the next minister but four who gets to take the credit for whatever's actually happened. And that's just the way it works. So we're going to need that kind of patience and long-term outlook. I expect it's going to be there because aerospace is something that's cherished across the political spectrum. And as I say, it knocks it out of the park as an industrial strategy candidate. You're a big exporter. Your spillover benefits are fantastic. I've really enjoyed the last 24 hours of trying to read up some of the pamphlets about the amazing return you get from investing in aerospace. You help all sorts of adjacent skills. So one of the things I'd hope to hear for must be decades, we've always complained that we are short of engineering talent in this country. And now we're about to hit a point where the engineering talent needs work. And engineering is a fantastic general skill. I know that you might think that somebody who's brilliant at just working on Rolls-Royce engines can only do that, but we all know that it's an analytical skill. It's a skill that all sorts of other sectors could do. What would be great to hear is if, as well as working at that sensible restructuring that Tom just described, moving down so that not everybody has their profit margins wiped out, those skills need to be retained in the country and other growing industries. And that is a much harder thing to do because we haven't been in a position where the government has needed to create new sources of demand at speed for quite a while. I think the only really successful example we've had recently, it wasn't at speed, is the offshore wind sector, where there's another good sector deal that is working well to keep skills going and hopefully bring work here. So I'm feeling, we're all meant to be quite pessimistic and uncertain right now. What we do know is that aerospace, it is going to have a really difficult time over the next few years. There's no doubt about it. And the fact that you're linked to a really fast-moving sector like airlines is one of the weird sort of almost contradictions here. You've got a really long investment cycle one, and then you've got airlines, which are entry and exit, and demand can fall off 100% really, really quickly. That makes it really, really challenging. But long-term, we still know that we need incredible innovation in this sector, that we have the skills here, and we have a good track record of working together. So weirdly enough, this sector under a lot of stress, I'm feeling quite optimistic, albeit as an observer.
Wonderful, thank you, Giles. Mandy, over to you.
Hello, thank you for inviting me today. I'm Mandy Richard. I'm the owner of a company called Produmax. We're global experts in flight controls and components, and we're based just outside of Bradford in the north of the country. For us, obviously, we're further down. We do supply OEMs and we do supply tier ones, but it's been a very challenging time. We have seen over the by the period of the pandemic, a 30% reduction in our order books, but we've managed to pivot quite quickly, and we've supplied ventilator components at speed to help the national effort. I think what's really important is that at times like this, manufacturing is really important, and the aerospace industry is right at the top of that manufacturing pinnacle. And so what we need is lots of help from governments. And a couple of people have mentioned sharing growth. We were one of the sharing growth beneficiaries. And over the last 5 years, we have doubled our turnover. We've grown our GVA by 40%. We've doubled our headcount. We've reduced our average age from about 50 to 37 by investing in apprentices. And so government stimulation has been fantastic in the past at making sure we have a competitive supply chain. What I think needs to happen is, on top of all of the fantastic support that the government has put in so far, is a more nuanced approach to aerospace. So, for example, the job retention scheme is a fantastic thing to happen. But for aerospace, where we have longer pipelines and where we've pivoted in the short term to supply ventilator components, for example, means we haven't been able to take advantage of that because the scheme, or to its full extent, because the scheme is date-based rather than time-based. And in a long cycle industry like ours, we probably need to look at a more time-based scheme. In terms of what do SMEs like me need for the future, well, we need some increased stimulation of demand to fill our latent capacity. So we need the government to have a more nuanced support for the aviation sector and to ensure customer confidence in getting on planes again, and to help us to do that successfully. We also need the government to pull forward public procurement in defence space and infrastructure, which we could also supply. So, for example, HS2. I think it's important, a couple of people have mentioned it previously, that we need to increase the competitiveness of the UK supply chain to maintain our global position, which I think we are third worldwide, post the COVID pandemic. So we need to increase investment in the sector around productivity. So, for example, the government could look at increased capital allowances and programmes around investment in digitisation to encourage SMEs to invest further at times when there is limited demand. And I think that's really important going forward for the levelling up agenda, where most SMEs and aerospace companies are outside the southeast. They tend to be in the north and the west, and they also tend to be SMEs, which is partly what the government agenda is about. I think we need to look at post the job retention scheme, a skills retention programme. So the average in UK engineering, the average age is 52, and we know that 18 to 24-year-olds are going to be the worst hit by this pandemic. We also know that manufacturing needs more digitisation, and 18 to 24-year-olds are digital natives. So putting together a programme, I welcome the government's recent announcements on traineeships and on apprentices, but the apprentice bonus is 12 weeks' wages. If we could put together a programme that looks at the individual, the company and the government investing over the 3-year programmes to make sure that current apprentices finish their apprenticeships, and we keep bringing in apprentices into that, it's much better than not being in work at all and gaining a qualification at the same time. And I think the loan schemes have been invaluable for big and smaller companies. We're currently in the process of going through CBILS, and we found that to be a process that is easy to engage with. I know there were some early teething problems, but they seem to have been ironed out. But I think it would be great if some of those loans came with some strings attached. And those should obviously be around sustainability. And it was fantastic to see the government announce its intention to be the first company to deliver a long-haul carbon neutral passenger jet. But also it should be around prompt payments. So to maintain liquidity throughout the supply chain, I think we need to, around those government interventions, look at some prompt payment codes that would help. And also to look at where we are using government and taxpayer money to invest in companies and to help them through this pandemic, that we look at making sure we retain work in the UK. Thank you.
Mandy, thank you very much. Before we move on to some more specific questions, I wondered if anybody wanted to come back on any of those points specifically.
Katie, only just to say that obviously, Mandy just mentioned it, the new Jet Zero Council, jointly led by ourselves in BAYS and the Department of Transport, will also meet soon. The council is dedicated to making net zero aviation emissions possible, and we will ensure we work in partnership towards a much more sustainable future. But alongside that effort, I think what we've got to do is build an even stronger and more robust UK supply chain. I think it came up from a couple of the contributions just now, because ultimately what we want to do is, one, stay differentiated in terms of product range and also obviously competitive. And so we've got to keep investing in the sort of the highly productive facilities, the training of staff, the traineeships, and of course, Mandy's point about cutting edge digital manufacturing processes. So taking Made Smarter as the pilot and seeing how we can scale that up across the UK as well, where you put more digital investment into SMEs so that actually they get better data out of their business, which allows them hopefully to be more productive and have a much better business. The industrial strategy, the industrial strategy is a brilliant piece of work, in my view. Designed and developed and delivered in a world of near zero unemployment, very high employment. We're now entering a very different world, so we're having a refresh and look at how we flex the industrial strategy with both sector deals and, of course, places. And local industrial strategies, of course, are playing a significant part in that. We've got a much more devolved infrastructure now with metro mayors. So there's a lot of work taking place at BEIS to make sure we deliver the sort of the next iteration, and aerospace will play a significant role in this. I did a sort of deep dive at the Whittle Labs with the Prince of Wales around how do you get to that zero emissions aircraft that the PM wants us to develop, not just the long haul, but also for the short haul. And there's phenomenal innovation taking place in the UK through the aerospace sector, through the chemical sector, and of course on everything from synthetic fuels to hydrogen, and of course EV as well. So a lot to go after, and this has been probably the toughest period in our history in many ways. Since the war, I went through the 80s property crash, the 2000 .com bubble crash when I launched YouGov, sort of, and 2 weeks later the whole world almost ended, and then of course the financial crisis of 08, 09. Nothing is like this, but I think there are real opportunities that come out of adversity, and I think one of them will be in the aerospace sector.
Thank you, and I'd like to come back to a bit more of a conversation on Jet Zero, actually, because we did have some questions on that, but I wondered if I could pick up on your points on industrial strategy and actually come to Giles, who has some background in this, and actually feels like a long time ago, but towards the beginning of the pandemic, actually wrote a report on where you thought government could help with business and policy, and I wondered if you had any thoughts moving on from that.
Well, I mean, part of what was incredible about trying to write that report was the government was innovating so fast that no sooner was the ink dried on a suggestion or a comment than the government had either acted or not done it. So it was quite remarkable. I mean, mostly it was an endorsement of the general approach the government took, which was to act as if we'd all done our best to insure ourselves against this pandemic and pay out on that insurance in a fairly indiscriminating way, because the pandemic has been totally indiscriminating. So what's interesting is a lot of normal Treasury virtues, which involve tough decisions and tough conversations about, are we getting what we want out of this? Are we encouraging you to work? A lot of those were abandoned, not just for speed, but because it was the right thing to do to abandon them. It was just keep everybody whole, incentivize everybody to stay at home. It's the opposite of normal policy making. And what I found really interesting was I thought that by the time the paper would be published, we were going to start to looking towards this next phase that we're in now, where the government is now looking to use its influence and funds to try to encourage the next phase, which is recovery and restructuring, which is where it gets much more difficult for reasons like the ones Tom is working on here, which is it's difficult and awkward to have to try to manage down a sector if it's got a problem with demand. It's very, very speculative too. We don't know, as you saw from the OBR's release yesterday, there could wide range of scenarios, and that would include for a sector like aerospace. I've got huge sympathy for Mandy, who says, could you do something about demand? It's very difficult because the government can't force people to go flying. It's largely a privatized sector, and you can't just keep sort of pouring money where there aren't tickets. So you need to think of other sources of demand, and that's really difficult to do. So in terms of looking forward, obviously it makes sense that good companies are still supported, that they have liquidity, that their solvency is protected. But the great virtue of our economy is its flexibility, the fact that it's good at transferring resources from one use to another. It's why nearly everybody was surprised by how well employment rebounded from the financial crisis, because we tried to keep some of that flexibility. Now, it's much more difficult for something, you can't just train overnight to be an engineer, you can't just create a new source of demand for aerospace or other engineering products, but that flexibility is still there, and sometimes with the help of government institutions. So given that the government is showing a very sensible, open-walleted attitude towards ideas that look like they might pay off and bolster the recovery, they're now moving to a much more difficult design phase. And this is where I think this kind of collaboration, and the Aerospace Growth Partnership is an absolutely epitome of how that works well, is going to be the key to a success.
Absolutely. And I would be a proponent for the AGP, but I completely agree with that. Tom, I have a question on the supply chain side and the work that you've been doing. Obviously, you're focused on the UK, but I wondered if there's any work and this is a question that's been happening to look at what else is going on in other countries. So how does the work that is taking place in the UK compare to what's happening around the world?
Yeah, I think clearly we're looking at what's happening in France, Germany, Spain, the US, and in Asia. France is probably the furthest ahead with the launch of Aerofund 4. They've had a formula that they've applied over 3 previous funds, and that fund is up and running just now, about will be by the end of this month, 1.2 billion, which is really focused on the short term for reshaping a number of the parts of the French supply chain. I think in Germany there will probably be something similar. It will take a bit longer, perhaps even to the end of the year. But again, that's been done in the past through KfW. I think there is probably a slight difference, less pressure for them, because they have, for example, extended the furlough schemes through chômage partiel and Kurzarbeit in Germany, which gives them 2 years. So having done that in 2008, I recall that we had 2 years where basically we could work the people 4 days a week and the government paid for the 5th day, and we didn't have that big of an issue in terms of skills management because by then demand started to pick up. So I think there are various mechanisms around the world. Clearly we have to come back to find something that is suitable in the UK solution. There's different social models, different political models in each of these other countries. And sometimes aerospace is, for example, in France, is probably an even higher strategic priority than it is in the UK. So they would see that as a crown jewel, and they will certainly do everything they can to support it. The danger, of course, that we need to watch in this situation is that they actually even have an ambition to grow their business through this cycle. And the only way they're going to grow their business is in a market that's down, is by getting business from somewhere else. So clearly that's going to be one of the challenges we have to watch, particularly in a post-Brexit environment, where the UK could be seen to be something of a sitting duck that could be easily picked off by the others who want to try and fix their shortage of work in their aerospace facilities. So that's certainly another one of the challenges that we have to take on top of the crisis caused by COVID.
Thank you. It's not a simple picture, is it? I wanted to come back to Mandy if I could. You were giving some ideas to the minister, and that had a question that came in, which was talking about from an SME perspective, how have you found communication with the government and being able to interact? To be able to access all the pots of money and the different schemes, but also just to be able to put forward those ideas. Have you found that an easy process?
In terms of the mechanisms the government's put in place, then it's certainly been straightforward. There's been lots of advice, lots of webinars, lots of different things that we could do to find out how to access things, and that's been really useful. In terms of the ventilator challenge, we went through the government process for that and got selected and managed to turn parts around within hours of receiving the drawings. So that was great. And in terms of putting ideas forward, then as an SME, we normally do that through our trade body, so ADS, through Make UK, and through going to events where you can promote your opinion. So I think that's been great. I think communication is something in my company that we're really keen on, clear communication, and I think the majority of communication we received from the government has been straightforward, albeit changing all the time, and that's because of the nature of the pandemic, and we appreciate that.
Thanks, Mandy. I wanted to come back slightly to the Jet Zero, zero emissions aircraft, a green recovery, all kind of buzzwords, but really exciting, I think, as an opportunity. We've always got challenge and opportunity. And when we asked for some questions, we have plenty on how do we come back in a more sustainable way and make sure that when we're growing that we are leading innovation and becoming the greenest aerospace industry in the world. And I think this ties in with some of the points that Giles was making on the ATI and funding and how this leads into the spending review. So it's a bit of a broad question, but I'm sure everybody has some views on that, and I wanted to open that up to the panel.
Do you want me, Kate, just to say a few words about the Jet Zero,
please, yeah,
and what it actually involves and so on? I mean, essentially, obviously, whilst we are combating coronavirus, it's really important that we continue to work on the sort of longer term priorities, to Giles' point, including obviously tackling climate change, decarbonisation of transport as a sector, and of course improving air quality. So COVID-19 has meant that people have had to profoundly change the way we all live, how people work, how they travel. Now, it is clearly sensible that we begin to sort of plan to reduce emissions and look to understand and take account of that change in behaviour. So part of that is sort of considering how aviation can then play a role in delivering on our net zero ambitions. So the Secretary of State at the Department for Transport, Grant Shapps, announced recently, obviously, that we are still planning to consult on our position on aviation and climate change later this year. The intention is to create a partnership, which I mentioned earlier, between industry and government to reduce aviation's carbon footprint and set sort of aviation on a path to net zero emissions by 2050 through the Jet Zero Council. What the council will do is bring ministers, CEO level stakeholders to provide some strategic leadership and sort of real direction of how do we get this sort of what I think in the deep dive of the principle I refer to as sort of burning platform and position the UK as the sort of world leader in aviation aerospace sector. So in terms of what it involves, decarbonisation is clearly difficult and challenging in this area. It will take a range of activity, including obviously alternative forms of propulsion, carbon capture or offsetting, and then obviously sustainable fuels. What we want to do is bring together sort of innovation and our net zero ambition and sort of the investing mindset in new technology to make existing aircraft greener, as well as then investing in new low and zero emissions forms of propulsion, so whether it's hybrid electric, fully electric flight, where that lands. Obviously, the sort of the innovators and the scientists will be better than I would. Although I'm an engineer, I'd like to see more engineers in Parliament as well. But nevertheless, I'll leave it to people who are far more expert than I. I'm a chemical engineer, along with sort of other smart low carbon policies. So cutting edge research with the right support from us in government will allow, I think, world-class aviation and aerospace sector to really capitalize on the opportunities of that cleaner aviation technology. Now, these are exciting technologies to take forward and to deliver that sort of sustained future of the sector. It really does need sustained investment, back to Giles' point. And of course, how does sort of, aviation fuels, how does that fit with the net zero target? So, clearly renewable transport fuel obligation, we are encouraging the production and use of sustainable aviation fuels under that RTFO, where sustainable renewable aviation fuels are already eligible for reward in the form of tradable certificates. And I think the future fuels for flight and freight competition makes more funding available to projects that will produce low carbon, I think, waste-based fuels to be used in aeroplanes and lorries. I was talking to an innovative company yesterday who's doing some work, not just in the UK, it's a UK business, but also with the US government as well. And so we're doing a lot across the sector. I think the Jet Zero Council will just pull all that together and make sure we've got the leadership in place that will hopefully deliver the sort of outcomes that Giles and others who are in government delivered in the earlier days of sort of the industry.
And so I guess it follows on, and perhaps then Giles might want to comment, but I guess what then can the government do to, obviously there's investment in R&T through things like the ATI, but to stimulate that investment from the industry now, because it's sort of, I guess it needs to start now. So is there more that you think government can do or plans to do that, to get that investment happening as soon as possible?
Is that one for me? I'll first acknowledge this is widely acknowledged to be one of the most difficult parts of the climate change agenda. So it's really encouraging that the government's made a really early commitment to it, because it's one that everybody reliably expects is going to take 20 or 30 years to fix. So you need to make an early start, and they have, and they're really owning it by giving it a name like Jet Zero and going for it. I'd say I'm also slightly optimistic, because I remember in 2010 people saying there are certain facts of life you can't deal with, and one of them is that propellers and seawater just can't be dealt with. Offshore wind will never be competitive, and really getting behind the sector, giving it demand certainty, investing a bit in its R&T, and it got there. I mean, way more than anyone actually expected. Even the most optimistic writer of Lib Dem pamphlets would have been amazed to see what it did. So I'm feeling the same kind of energy going on with aerospace, in that people were saying it's really literally impossible. This is the one where there will always be carbon emitted. And in the last year, much more optimism around the use of synthetic fuels, clever incremental improvements like changing the flight path, the things that the Sustainable Aviation Coalition are working on, different materials and so forth. So yeah, it's definitely, I mean, as for what government can do, I mean, the difficult bit is there isn't the equivalent of the demand lever that we had with the electricity sector. We can't, unless you plan to have some pretty difficult tax decisions, and given how international it is, there's a certain constraint on that, particularly at a time when we want to encourage people back to flying. The last thing you can easily do is make flying more expensive with taxes. But you normally need some kind of a lever to level the playing field between the cheap existing option of using paraffin and the more expensive option of using the synthetic fuel, and that's really very difficult. It might happen if the price of electricity carries on falling as hard as it is, and some of the exciting innovations the government is pursuing elsewhere on things like nuclear power come good. Maybe that playing field will even itself, but in the short run, there's a tough decision to be made there on tax too, I think.
Thanks, Giles. Tom, do you want to come in on that?
I think the key concern, and clearly the solution to this was well recognised that even before the crisis, we had a problem of aviation's footprint. So while aviation might only contribute 3% in terms of emissions, it still has a growth. It did have a growth, but it was doubling every 15 years. So we certainly had an issue that said, if we don't address this, then we will come under pressure. And you can all remember the Flugsham and things like that, which were gathering momentum even up until Christmas time, up until this crisis happened. So I think a younger generation, much more conscious about the environmental impact. And I think most of the major companies now also recognize that they need solutions. Those solutions will be a menu, because there isn't a silver bullet that will fix all the problems. But clearly, we would imagine other industries like trucking, shipping, addressing their emissions, and aviation will have to do that as well. Aviation probably has the toughest solution because the problem is that kerosene is still the most energy efficient source, and of course weight is crucial. However, I think there will be the existing pressure of CORSIA. Okay, this is only the year 1 of CORSIA will be set on last year's standards. Year 2 would have been this year, but it's probably not going to be now by the rules that have been made by ICAO. But there is still an awful lot of old aeroplanes out there. So going a little bit to Mandy's comment, there is, you could argue, a need for some kind of cash for clunkers, that if you get a lot of the old aircraft out of use, you will have a significant impact. You know, a new generation aircraft is 15% more fuel efficient than the ones that are in service today. So there are some levers that can be pulled quickly. Then I think the other key issue is, yes, it's good to go and develop technologies. I would remind people there are only 2 commercial aerospace companies in the world. A third is emerging in China, but I somehow suspect that UK technology isn't aimed at improving the performance of Chinese aircraft. So as a destination for UK developed technology, there's only 2 places to go. One is Seattle, the other is Toulouse. And whatever technologies the UK develops, and let's hope they do, they can only do that if it links into a roadmap that comes from one of those 2 platforms. Otherwise, you're operating a science project, which will be great. Lots of people will get PhDs. But if it doesn't link into the programs that are being done by the 2 primes, with a clear target of being on some of those programs in 2027 to 28, then you'll not be on the next aircraft that comes in 2035, which is likely to be hydrogen powered. That can be a hydrogen fuel cell. It can be an electric, but without a lithium-ion battery, which has their own environmental issues. And drop-in fuels will be part of that solution. But of course, drop-in fuels only make sense if they don't replace things like food production or water consumption, which has potentially an even bigger impact. So I think my urging would be, yes, it's good to do those things, but let's make sure that they fit into a pattern and that the government doesn't end up spending taxpayers' money on science projects that don't end up being adopted.
Thank you, Tom. Mandy, did you want to come in on any of those points?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Tom said. I think it's really important that we move on this and we link in with Boeing and Airbus on doing things. I think the government's ambition is fantastic, but we just need to make sure that we have a competitive supply chain there, so that when we do have a breakthrough and it is linked in with the OEMs, that we actually can take advantage of it in the UK. At the same time, I think we need to make sure that manufacturing and the current aerospace supply chain is greened up with technical skills and knowledge and the right values and attitudes in the workforce to develop those sustainable and social and economic and environmental outcomes. And I think there should be maybe some financial incentives for businesses who retrain workers with green skills, and a wider rollout of training for businesses on how to get involved with that, and also how to reduce their own footprint. Because obviously there is the jet footprint, but there is the wider footprint of the manufacturing establishments, which are quite power hungry.
So following on from that, a question that we did have is there a longer term option in terms of financing we can be looking at beyond loans? Are there any thoughts on that? What can we do beyond the loans that we've been allowing companies access to up until now? Tom?
All I can say is, sorry.
Carry on, Giles.
All I can say is we thought, a lot about this in the bailout scheme. It's obviously very live, and I can understand the Chancellor being very reticent about it because the government has currently guaranteed loans to up to 1 million companies. You can't easily act like a bailiff towards those companies, nor act like an owner-manager. When it comes to smaller companies, normally when we look at different finance, like equity, it does involve a really bespoke negotiation. Most owners don't want to have another owner suddenly arriving, even if it's in a situation of distress when they want to be helped. So I imagine it is possible. It's just very difficult to develop at speed and scale. It's a classic example of where the coronavirus crisis, even more than the financial crisis, has presented just entirely novel problems for the government to solve. So there was a discussion today, BBC's Simon Jack, I think, discussed it, of maybe student loan style finance for companies, which might apply very broadly. And after all, we managed to do that for millions. But that took a long time to set up. So yeah, I do think they should be looking at these other ones. But like my comments earlier, people should be patient. It will take time for the government to design those sorts of things in a way that satisfies all parties.
I think the key issue would be the question of loans. I think for a lot of the SMEs, Amanda could comment on this much better than me, that what I'm finding through the task force is the challenge is that if we offer people who were encouraged to take on a lot of debt to manage this ramp up and to prepare for, I mean, everyone was preparing for building rate 70 on the A320 and up to rate 57 on the MAX. So everyone was being encouraged to commit a lot of money. They took on already a lot of debt. And of course, that meant in many cases, they had no cushion to go through this. So the challenge is giving them more debt at this point in time doesn't necessarily fix the problem. So that's in itself an issue. I can understand the government's reticence to get involved as a shareholder. And I think Giles's comment is, I've also had the same message. A lot of companies say, we need help, but they're, some of these are quite proud and owner-managed companies, and they don't value the idea of having another solution or someone else coming to tell them what to do. So there's a whole bunch of those issues. There are also some specific issues that quite a number of UK aerospace companies are owned by private equity companies. And those in turn are often closed-end funds or where the shareholding is by design very small. And they have a financial model that's more about loans and interest is how the investor extract money from the scheme. So taking those business models forward and trying to get loans for them, even loans out of CBILS, is very difficult. So there are some very specific UK challenges that we have to try and work our way through. And that would be my concern. But I think there is a need for a longer term patient capital approach. And whether that's done through a British Business Bank or another mechanism, I think would make sense. And I think it's also an opportunity for government to play a part in shaping that industrial policy. I think the alternative is you say, well, we'll just leave this to the market, and the private equity guys who are calling me up every day, they will pick the carcass clean like vultures fairly quickly.
Thank you. So we're coming to the end of our time now, and I'd like to get some closing comments from the Minister. But before we do that, are there any final comments from the rest of the panel? Thank you very much. Minister, some final comments from you, and it'd be great to hear what your vision for the sector looks like as we come out of this crisis and into the future.
No, absolutely. I'm just on that last question. Look, nothing's off the table. We're looking at everything from sort of stimulating demand. But the PM said at PMQs this week around looking at everything, the ideas around scrappage schemes, or talking to both Airbus and, of course, Boeing as well about communicating better as to how safe being inside an airplane is because of the air filtration system that makes airplanes incredibly safe. So across the board, or some ideas from the industry around creating a fund to look at how they support the supply chain. So nothing is off the table. We're looking at everything. For us, aerospace is a priority. Our priority is to return the sector back to growth in a much more sustainable way. As co-chair of the Aerospace Growth Partnership, I speak regularly to both the sort of the large companies, but also to the pioneering companies across the sector. And what's really interesting is that the large companies are absolutely bought into the sort of the innovation and Jet Zero, as well as some of the new challenges that are sort of coming up with ideas, trying to raise funds to do things that are in many ways different to what has taken place up to now. So I'm really proud of the work that we are doing to weather the storm of this crisis, while continuing to focus energy and effort into innovation and building a world-class aerospace product. I think we're building on the fantastic work and investment made by industry in recent years. And I think we've implemented a range of measures that together will further develop, I think, a UK aerospace supply chain that is already world leading in the manufacture of high value aircraft components. The UK is the home of Airbus's wing manufacturing, and we are working closely with Airbus on the next generation Wings of Tomorrow research program. I'm particularly pleased that Airbus have committed to building the wings of the A321XLR airliner here in the UK, a real testament to our world-leading talent and technology. We're working with Rolls-Royce on its cutting-edge propulsion technologies, developing lighter, more fuel-efficient ultrafan engine. This work done in partnership with us and, of course, industry will secure the long-term high-value jobs across the UK and, of course, throughout the supply chain. Since 2013, the government has funded over 2.6 billion pounds of aerospace R&D projects in partnership with industry, with over 200 SMEs receiving support. In the past year alone, by the way, government and industry have provided 400 million of aerospace research and development projects through the ATI program. So together, these initiatives, I think, will inject that sort of the next iteration of the revolution in aerospace technology, and I think will help realize our ambition set out by the Prime Minister last month to produce the world's first net zero long-haul passenger plane. I think due to the sector's rich heritage, it's really hard work and ingenuity. We will build from a position of strength. I've no doubt that we will succeed. But my final message to you is that we must not limit our ambition to maintaining our world-leading position in global aerospace. We must build new capabilities that will deliver the next generation of sustainable aircrafts. I think we are up to the task and we can do it. And it's really important to get there that we must really embrace the potential of advanced manufacturing while sort of supporting and nurturing talent within the workforce. And I think we also must support the supply chain that makes all this possible, because otherwise, if you let that go, you won't have the building blocks available to you. So we have to stick to our commitments in the supply chain charter. And we must continue to work, I think, in partnership within industry. It could be new models. We've been exploring some of that on this webinar across the UK to really realize that Jet Zero aviation delivered, I think, in the most competitive, innovative aerospace sector probably in the world. So thank you for hosting this. I think just if you think about what we're doing right now on this webinar, and what we're doing for Farnborough Connect, it demonstrates that this industry doesn't just lie down and say, oh, well, COVID has beaten us, because it hasn't, and it will never do. Thank you very much indeed.
Minister, on that really positive, uplifting note, thank you so much for taking time out to join us today, and thanks to the rest of the panelists. I thought that was a really interesting debate, and I really hope that this time, in 2 years' time, we'll be all having a similar conversation, but thinking about the future, the next steps, and how we're even closer towards zero emission and all the great stuff in Farnborough at the air show, watching planes fly in the sky. So thanks so much, everybody. Have a good day. and see you all soon, I hope.